Hey, this is Josh Alexander from Orange County Housing Market News. If you're a returning listener, thanks again for subscribing. I really appreciate the support. If this is the first time you've listened to the show, just to let you know, this show is basically all things Orange County real estate. So I go through and I interview local professionals. I talk about the different trends going on in the Orange County and surrounding area market. And then I also go through some of the tricks and tips for home buyers to make sure if you are looking to buy or sell a home, you can do so successfully. In today's episode, I'm going to be covering one of the biggest fears I'm hearing from sellers right now when they're thinking about potentially selling their house. And surprisingly, it has nothing to do with selling the property, but everything to do with finding that replacement property after they get into escrow with the current house that they want to sell. And this is a big concern right now because right now we are in a historically hot seller's market, the hottest seller's market we've seen in 15 years. So properties are falling off the shelf. So as a seller, their biggest concern is, yes, I can sell my house, but how am I going to find that replacement property quickly and be able to place competitive offers to get into escrow on a new property at the same time as selling my house and then making sure that we're not going to end up without some place to live while we're going through this process. So I'm here to say that is a valid concern. However, there's a bunch of things in place and things you can do inside the contract as both a buyer and a seller to make sure you're going to be safeguarded against this type of thing happening to you. So because there's so much information to cover about this, we're actually going to be splitting today's episode into two separate parts. So today, we're going to be talking about contingencies. In other words, protections that you have as a buyer and a seller as you're going through this process of trying to buy and sell a home at the same time to make sure that you're going to keep yourself safe, make sure you have some place to live, and make sure that if something goes wrong with either selling your property or buying a new property, you have ways to get out of the contract and that you're not stuck without a place to live. And then next time, we're going to go over things like a rent back period, extending escrow, and a bunch of other smaller things you can do as a seller and different options you have to make sure that if you are trying to buy or sell a home at the same time, you're keeping yourself safe, stress-free, but able to continue to go through the whole process and make sure you can close on both the sale of your home as well as buying the new property without any issues. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get into the first part, and that's contingencies. Okay, so let's discuss two of the most commonly used forms when someone's trying to sell a house and buy a replacement property at the same time. This is a very common occurrence that happens all the time in the industry, so most agents are very familiar with these type of forms and the protections they offer. But a lot of buyers and sellers either don't know about them or don't really know what they're used for. So let's cover them so that way you know exactly how they're used and how they protect you during a transaction. So first, let's go on the seller side. So there's a form that's universally used throughout California. It's called the Seller's Purchase of Replacement Property Form, or SPRP. So this form, what it basically lays out is it gives the seller, once they get into escrow with the buyer, a certain amount of days to go out to find a replacement property and then put an offer in and get an escrow on that replacement property. Typically, it's 17 days is how the contract is written, but you can put in any number you want to. So 10 days, 45 days, 60 days, you can fill that out basically however you want to. But what you need to know is you're able to specify a number of days that you're going to be able to go out, put offers on homes, and find a replacement property to get an escrow with. And then the second part of that form basically says that once you are in escrow, you are therefore required to close escrow on that property before you fully commit to selling your current home to the buyer that you're going into escrow with. And that basically says that you're going to be able to guarantee that you're going to have some place to live once you sell a property, once you sell your own property. So this form, again, is very commonly used, and there's a bunch of different ways to fill it out, 100 different ways you can fill it out, but in general, it's something that almost all sellers are going to use when they're trying to buy a replacement property at the same time. So just like anything, there are pros and cons of this form. So the pro is obviously that you're giving yourself a certain guarantee that you have a specific number of days to go out, look for a new property, place offers, get into escrow, and then once you're into escrow, being able to say, hey, I need to be able to close on this property before I fully commit to selling my own. So that's the pro. The con is that you might have buyers that want to place offers on your home, but might be in a similar situation where they have to have a very specific deadline on when they need escrow to close. And even though you can tell them this is a deadline, there's a lot more risk involved for the buyer when there's an open-ended contract saying that, hey, I'm not going to be able to sell you this home until I can find a replacement property. There's not really a guarantee for them saying that this is the date escrow is going to close. So some of those buyers might not be able to place offers on your home, or those buyers that may be in a lease, that the lease expires on a certain day, they can't renew it, they have to be in a new home by that day. Those type of people might not be able to place very competitive offers on your house because of their own timeline issues that they need to deal with. However, we are in a very hot seller's market right now, so typically out of the 10 people that might be placing offers, a few of them might back out because of that form you're asking them to fill out, but you usually have enough buyers right now that it's going to give you a good shot at getting multiple offers on your house still and being able to get into escrow with a buyer that has that type of flexibility. And this form, just to kind of be clear, is not just a one-size-fits-all form either. There's 100 different ways you can fill this out. So if you're working with multiple buyer offers, you can go through each buyer, figure out what their exact needs are, and then you can kind of alter the form a little bit to fit with their needs a little bit better. So for instance, if the buyer only wants to give you, let's say, 3 weeks to go out and find a property and place escrow or get into escrow on that property, you have the ability to say, yes, give me 3 weeks. If I can't find a property in 3 weeks, we can either renegotiate or you have the right to back out of escrow, and then the worst case scenario is you put your house back on the market again. Or for instance, if you want to have something that's more buyer friendly, instead of asking the buyer to put their deposit in immediately as soon as you open escrow and start their contingency period, so they have to line up their inspector, which they have to pay for out of pocket, they have to line up their appraisal, which they have to pay for out of pocket, you can say, hey, you don't have to put any deposit in, you don't have to start your contingencies for inspection, for appraisal, until I'm confirmed in escrow on a new place of my own, and then we'll start those contingency timeframe periods. So that kind of leaves the buyer with a little bit more flexibility, a lot less skin in the game, which is always a disadvantage if you're a seller because they have no financial incentive to stay into escrow, but it might appeal to some more buyers that are kind of on the fence of if they want to place an offer or not. So again, that's just a couple examples of how you can structure this exact form to fit whatever needs you need to have for the exact buyer you're working with. And again, talk to an agent, because when you are placing offers and you are using this form, you just want to make sure you're doing it the correct way and giving yourself that legal protection, so that way you're not going to be caught off guard when something happens in escrow and you have to back out of selling your home. Okay, so now let's talk about and go over how to protect yourself on the buying side of things when you're trying to sell your home and then buy a new home at the same time. So just like there's a form you can fill out to protect yourself as a seller, the same goes for a buyer. So the form to protect yourself as a buyer is called Contingency for Sale of Buyer's Property, or COP form for short. So in a nutshell, what this allows you to do is to submit an offer to a seller and say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I would love to purchase this house, but I can't guarantee that I'll be able to purchase it unless my current house closes escrow so I can take the funds from that and purchase this house. So that form is giving you that protection where if something happens in escrow on your current home or it's not able to close, you're able to back out of that contract to purchase your new home and you're not forced to buy it. Now again, same thing goes with this form. There are pros and cons. So the pro obviously is you're not going to be trying to purchase a home that you're not going to be able to afford because you don't have the money that you needed from the amount of money you're getting from the current sale of your home. So that's going to give you that protection. The con is, especially in today's market when it's such a hot seller's market, buyers that have any kind of extra contingencies on their offer are going to have a harder time getting accepted right now. So when you're submitting your offer and you're submitting an extra contingency on top of that saying, hey, I'd love to buy your house, but I'm not going to be able to buy it unless this one closes, that just puts a little bit more caution into the seller when they're looking at who am I going to accept and who am I going to counter. So just like you as a seller, you're looking for a combination of the most secure offer as well as the highest price. the seller on the home that you're trying to buy is most likely looking for that same thing. So just like the other form, there's a bunch of different ways you can fill this out. So if you're trying to be a little bit more aggressive and to give the seller some assurance that if something were to happen, they have some way of getting out of escrow, and there's some kind of timeline to it, you can basically tell them, hey, if I'm going to have this amount of days to go through escrow with you, and I'm going to remove my contingency to sell this house and this date. So that basically gives them a timeline saying that by this date, let's say it's 17 or 21 days after we open escrow, if I can't guarantee that I'm going to sell my home, then you can go ahead and say, hey, I want to cancel escrow and find another buyer to go with in that case. So that gives the seller at least a little bit of confidence. It gives them some way out of the contract, because in a typical contract, once you go into escrow, all of the power shifts from the seller, who is doing all the negotiating and trying to get the best deal from the multiple offers they're getting. All that power goes to the buyer. So if the buyer doesn't breach the contract, once you get into escrow, it's very, very difficult for the seller to get out of that contract. So this just gives you a way to get that seller and say, hey, I've got this amount of time to clear up what I have to do with my sale of my own property. And if I can't by then, you can cancel the contract and go with someone else. So again, every contingency you put in place right now as a buyer trying to purchase a home is going to make it a little bit harder for you to get into escrow. However, just like the other form, there's 100 different ways you can fill it out. You can talk to the seller, figure out what they need, what they're comfortable with, and try to structure your offer to best suit their needs so you have the best chance of getting accepted into escrow. So hopefully this gives you a pretty good understanding that just using these two forms alone, and not even talking about some of the other things we'll go over next week, that there's significant things in place to keep you protected as both a seller when you're selling your property, as well as when you're buying a new property at the same time. So hopefully this eliminated some of the fear. The last thing I do want to do before I wrap things up today is I do just want to go over just kind of a basic timeline so you can understand how this whole process works and how everything works together, to hopefully make it a little bit more clear on how you go through this entire process when you're trying to sell and buy a home at the same time. So let's start at the very beginning. So typically what happens in this market especially is you're going to start out by putting your home on the market first. And the reason you do this is because if you started trying to place offers before you have your house on the market, you're basically going up to the seller and saying, hey, I would love to purchase this house, but I do have to sell my property first. And oh, by the way, it's not even on the market yet. Most sellers, especially in this market, are just going to laugh at you because there'll be 10 other offers on the table at a better price, possibly even better terms, and they're not even going to consider your offer. So typically in this market, you're getting your house on the market first, and then as soon as it hits the market, that's when you're going out and looking for new property and starting to place your offers. Now, your offers won't be extremely strong when you first start out because you're not in escrow yet on the property that you're trying to sell. However, you're at least on the market. The seller can see that you're trying to sell your house. There's a plan in place, and that will give them a little bit more confidence to hopefully accept your offer. Now, at the same time as you're placing offers, hopefully you're getting offers from buyers as they tour into property, and especially in this market, hopefully you're getting multiple offers. And then you're going through the whole typical process of going back and forth with the buyer, trying to negotiate terms, letting them know, hey, I'd love to sell you this property, but I do need to buy a replacement property. So let's figure out how that's going to work using this form. You're going through and you're finding that perfect buyer that's going to work and that you can figure out something that's going to be beneficial for both of you. And then you're getting into escrow. So once you open escrow on the buying side of things, typically what you're doing in that contract is agreeing to, hey, I would love to open escrow. I do need to have your deposit immediately. However, the contingency periods won't start until I actually find a replacement property and get into escrow. And I'll show you why you want to do that in a minute. So now that you're in escrow, now again, when you're placing offers, your offers just get a little bit stronger. You can say, hey, I'm in escrow now. Here's the buyer. We have everything ready to go. As soon as I open escrow, they start their contingency. I'll start my contingencies. Everything can line up. It will be great. You place a few offers. You find the right property. You find the right seller that's going to be able to work with those contingencies. And you go ahead and get into escrow on a new property of your own. So when you get into escrow, now, the contingency period, if you're unfamiliar with what a contingency is, it's basically just a protection put in place that allows someone to back out of a contract if they needed to based on a very specific circumstance. So the buyer starting their contingency periods, you're starting your contingency periods around the same time. So for example, the buyer is going to schedule their inspector to go out to the property, inspect the house, go through, ask for anything they want repaired. You're going to negotiate with the buyer and come to an agreement, and then they're going to remove that inspection contingency. At the same time, you're going through your new property, going through the inspection, talking to the seller, negotiating a repair request that you have, and then you're removing that inspection contingency around the same time. When those contingencies get removed, everybody gets further locked into the transaction, everything gets more secure. You're doing the same thing for the appraisal contingency, and then typically you're doing the same thing for the loan contingency, which is usually the last contingency in place. And the reason that's important is because once that last contingency is removed, then everybody gets locked into purchasing the home. It's very hard for the buyers to get out of the contract at that point. So once that final contingency is removed, around the same time for both the buyer as well as you as a buyer on your end trying to purchase the home, then everything's pretty much locked in. And the biggest thing that you're doing at that point is really coordinating the closing. So what you typically have to do, especially if you need the money from the sale of your property to purchase the new property, is that you're closing escrow on your property. You're taking that money, those funds, and transferring it to the escrow company of the property that you're trying to purchase. They're taking those funds, they're going through and purchasing your property, and then you're given time to move out from your property into the new property before the buyer takes possession of that property. So hopefully that kind of gives you a very basic outline of the way everything works and why those contingencies are in place and how everything works with making sure that you're able to do both at the same time to keep yourself protected. So I know there's 100 different ways that these contracts can be written. So if you have specific questions, make sure you're talking them through with your agent, letting them know what your needs and wants are, and figuring out the best way to make sure you stay protected, as well as still being able to place aggressive offers when you're trying to purchase property right now, because it is such a hot seller's market. So hopefully you found this information useful. Until next week, stay happy, stay healthy, and we'll see you later. Bye.